Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Hope you had a good break. And we're going to kick off our next and last session of the day. It's called Dealing with Real Life Scenarios. And I'll be rejoined by Martell Winters again, as well as my prior FDA colleague, Doug Campbell, who is a senior consultant at Interpro QRA. Welcome, Martell. Welcome, Doug. Nice seeing you guys.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're going to be talking about some real life scenarios from each of our different perspectives around critical quality decision making, improvements, whatever. And I'll kick it off. I mean, let you guys go after this. So I've seen a lot with inside the FDA, outside the FDA, where a firm goes into some kind of remediation, whether it be self-imposed or a regulator driven, like a post-inspection. They get the team together, cross-functional team. A project manager puts together a great project plan. They execute upon the plan. They find the issue or issues. They correct, prevent. They check all the boxes are checking, they get to that baseline level of regulatory compliance. However, in my opinion, they never got to real compliance. So they check the boxes, they fix the issue du jour, if you want to call it that. However, they didn't learn because it happened again. I talked a little bit earlier today, I call it the regulatory roller coaster, where they fix things and then a couple years later it gets bad again. So they didn't embed the learning. They didn't get down to educating people, not just training them, but educating them. Their supervisors didn't see it, or they changed leadership, so it wasn't ingrained into the overall quality culture of the organization. So it worked, but it didn't work so well, and it kept happening. So, I mean, that's one example I've seen. And I've seen it other ways where it becomes embedded and so forth. It becomes part of the overall organizational culture and so forth. So, from that perspective, have you guys seen stuff similar? And I'll go ahead and Doug, I'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Steve. Yes, of course. I mean, I think that, in my experience, it's really everyone's at some level of compliance out there. And I think, again, like the idea of using the term compliance, if that's your goal, I mean, so being in compliance with the minimal standard, understanding that the regulations provide the minimal standard. If that's your goal, you're already, set up for, not really meeting the mark, so to speak. And so, I think that there's all kinds of situations where whether it's prior to, during, or after a regulatory inspection, where you're at some stage of it, and if you are if you find yourself or there, I've certainly had plenty of experience where people are scrambling to put it together as if we're going to put on a show during this inspection that's coming. And it was like that is something that obviously you are that's not even going close to compliance. This is like you were trying to just make it through the 3 or 4 or 5 days of the FDA inspection or other other regulatory inspection, and then keep your fingers crossed that everything works out, and or that they don't dig too deep, or they don't find the one thing that everyone at the on the other side of the table knows is there. And then and again, on a risk-based approach, or inspectors or investigators are only going to have like so much time. They're only going to be able to go, they'll have a long list of deviations or complaints or change controls that they'll only pick a few to kind of get a feel for what's there. So this idea that is pervasive. I see it at some level all the time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've seen it way too much where it's all about the show and that's it. And once the show stops, and hopefully they, like I said, remember, they get out unscathed. And like you said, the other side of the table says, "Thank God they didn't look under that other table, because if they would have looked under there, we would have been in a world of hurt." Yeah, I agree. Any thoughts from you, Martell, on that?
If I might, I do, yes. But let me, with your background, Steve, what was it? Was it pretty obvious to you when it was a show versus when there was an ingrained quality mindset as you were doing these types of reviews?
Yeah, good question. So I think sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can't, because some companies get so darn good at inspection management. It's like it's like they're choreographing a show, and then they get it down where, look at from here. One area, that kind of aspect you can look at it when the FDAs or what other regulators assessing state of control. If you're in control of your whole kind of management process, it kind of shows you're potentially could be in control of other things. So that's where it comes to the auditor or the investigator or the inspector, or whatever it may be, really getting into those details and seeing what they can find and some of that other stuff we talked about earlier.
Right.
Good question. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but back to your original question on the roller coaster thing. On the science side, the big problem we have when we're addressing these types of questions is whatever we put in place to fix the problem now, is it sustainable? And how can we prove sustainability as opposed to having this be a part of this, okay, well, the group here knows it now. And but once this group moves on to other things, then, or different jobs, different positions within the company, then that mindset gets lost. So how do you make things, these types of corrections you're doing, how do you make them sustainable and ensure that they're sustainable? And usually that involves things like training, reminders, and procedures. This is an important part. Make sure that it's addressed. But back on the training side, a good example for that we see, and I'm sure this applies to other aspects outside of a laboratory setting, where the training is, okay, I read the procedure, I watched the test, or I talked to someone about this. They had me talk about it, or they watched me perform the test, and so now I'm trained. And that type of training makes it almost impossible to maintain the types of changes that need to be implemented, so that's sustainable going forward. So much more detail and training, where the individual aspects of the training are actually broken down specifically in a document, so that those things are captured. That's one way that we've had, one thing we've done to make sure that you're not losing information as time passes.
Gotcha. And the other thing I was going to mention around this example I gave is have the hit by the bus exercise. Like if this person this leadership team gets all hit by a bus tomorrow, how do we know what they did, why we did it, and why we didn't do it, or what so forth, so they can carry on? You think about some of the regulators. I think it started actually with the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperative Scheme actually raised the thing in one of their guidances that says, when a leadership team or a CEO or a head of quality or head of operations changes, it immediately raises up the risk radar because of this type of phenomenon. Doug, I'm going to hand it over to you. Give me an example you've seen in your past, from your time at the FDA and outside the FDA. You've seen a lot in your career for sure. So, yeah.
Bouncing off this same idea. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that, as I said, I think that, you will find that it is universal. But I think that you guys really touched on it in the last session, and I think that what we're talking about here is the difference between establishing and really ingraining a quality culture versus not, and it's as simple as the way you go about your training and those kinds of things. But I think that that's just it. I mean, if your quality culture, or the process and the organization that you have established is as weak as, if we pull certain folks out of the equation, this thing's going to fall apart, then then you didn't have the right ideas from the beginning of really establishing the foundation of the quality culture, and then the foundation of the quality management system. And so, I mean, obviously there are individuals who bring with them the energy and the encouragement that it takes for that day in, day out operation. And that's really where, again, talking about like being ready for 5 days of the FDA inspection, and then like kicking it back out of high gear for the remainder until the next customer audit or the next regulatory inspection. And that is, an indication of the type of quality culture that you've established there. And I mean, we could say the words, very easily, and the concept is out there. But really making it something tangible is the difference between having success and not having success. Having the ability to kind of allow your folks to do their jobs in their atmosphere and in their different departments, but we're all working together and this is a common goal, and each person is bringing in their inputs, and then the final outcome is what we're all, shooting for, which is quality product on the market for patients. So this equation is well understood. These ideas and concepts are well understood. And I always say it's easy for me to say the words. And I've been preaching this sermon about quality culture and all these things for a long time, but I have just a handful. I mean, I've seen hundreds of places. I've got a handful of folks that are actually making it work. And so like trying to achieve that and build that idea, again, is great when we're talking about academics. The reality of it is, you have folks that have to be encouraged on a day in, day out basis, whether we have an upcoming FDA inspection or we don't. That's really it.
Difference between running a race like the marathon or a sprint versus
Sure.
running a sprint versus a marathon, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Martel, from your perspective, talking about some other bigger concepts and so forth, what have you seen in your time over your career? Some things you can think about, whether it be from the science side of QMS and beyond.
The first thing that comes to my mind with that question, and this happens to us all the time, we'll get a call from a customer and they'll say, well, so I'm in the quality group and so-and-so just left, and I got handed microbiology and stability assurance and everything associated with that. I'm already at capacity. And they said, oh, by the way, why don't you just take on all this stuff as well? And as if it's like a side job. And as a microbiologist and sterilization person, of course, that hurts my feelings, that topic merits more than just, oh, by the way, will you also tackle the microbiology and sterilization side of things? So, the example that I would share that comes to mind here is make sure that when you're addressing all the important topics that need to be addressed, that it's not that you've got people assigned to it where it's understood that that's going to be a significant part of their job. And I think sometimes it can be, and maybe this happens in other areas, and maybe you guys have this experience as well, but certainly in the world of microbiology and stability assurance, it often gets handed down to someone. And, hey, you're in the quality team. You took a microbiology class 20 years ago. We're going to put you in charge of this aspect, which is a huge critical component. No matter how well a product is engineered, it might work perfectly well, but if these other aspects are not properly dealt with, then you're going to have problems. So make sure that you treat this, make sure you treat all aspects of the quality system with equal importance.
Well said. Well said. Gotcha. So let's move on to the next question. So, guys, from your experience, and Doug, I'll start with you. So, talk about an experience or experiences, if you want to give a couple of examples, or a company that you know of. You can make it as generic as possible, knowing we can't share trade secrets, has achieved regulatory compliance, but failed to achieve real compliance.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the beginning of our discussion here, where we're talking about like, what does compliance really mean? Or it's the same thing, and you see it in your feed, in your LinkedIn feed. I'm seeing it all the time. Like all these old FDA investigators are writing in about how they're now consultants, and they're going out to the places, and they've just shown up, and the past regulatory inspection, whether it was EMEA or FDA or whatever, we got no 483. So we must be in compliance, and so you try to explain it. I think everybody understands it, and yet it just happened to me again yesterday. Where someone, I'd been out to help them out, and the inspection came, and guess what? There was no 483, and I was like, well, I did, and I you want to kind of take it in for a second and be like, okay, well, there was some level of success there. We've been working very hard for this. It was a difficult 5 days, and we made it through. But the idea that that there are no other issues inside your shop because they were not recorded on a 483, it just doesn't jive that way. And so there's this false sense of security. People talk about it all the time. And I think that, like for me, and I know my colleagues who are out there, on the outside, and certainly, we deal with this on a routine basis. That's the, I I try to explain to them, and I mean, I think everyone understands it. But so the idea is that, it's a snapshot. And the inspection is a snapshot. That 483 is a snapshot, whether there's observations on it or not. I mean, it isn't necessarily the FDA policy. It's just the judgment of those investigators on the team for the inspection. So you have to take all of this with a grain of salt. But I think, for me, what that means, like this real compliance versus regulatory compliance is, I mean, and I've been to places who have, had a series of FDA inspections with no 483s for whatever reason, right? And again, we talk about roller coasters, we talk about changes in management, we talk about all kinds of things that we could change pieces of variables in the equation and have different outcomes. And that's the thing where, yes, I know it's been 10 years and 3 FDA inspections, but I've come in now and poked holes in every single system inside this operation. So, and with data integrity, that was a thing where, like some people can dig into the very, individual lines of code. I mean, other people are very high level. So, the scope and the breadth of the inspection, is going to be different. And then, like you can't allow that to kind of cloud your judgment into thinking that everything's okay here, and really, if you are dedicated to continual improvement, it wouldn't really matter. This would just be a blip on the chart where it's like, okay, I mean, let's pat each other on the back for a second, and then like I say, get back to that day in, day out CGMP mission, which is never going to stop. It's like that's just it. So.
Fit for use products for the patients. Yeah, Martel, any thoughts on that, or any example where you can think of where it's regulatory compliance versus real compliance, whether it be from the lab perspective or somewhere else?
Yeah, I see an example of that I see regularly is with regards to supplier qualification work. And the reason I see it so often is because it's not too uncommon for the, as you're going through all your supplier work, you're qualifying your suppliers and you're asking all these good questions on documentation, procedures, all that stuff. But then when it turns out that there's a problem with on the sterilization or microbiology side, you go back and say, well, you have these 25 suppliers that all provide parts to or components or excipients or drug products or whatever. How well do you understand the microbiological aspects of what they do? And I said, well, that's not on our checklist. The checklist doesn't say to check on that. So we don't know what their water system's like. We don't know what details that we need from them on the C of A. When they are inspecting products, just recently had a situation where a company has a supplier, and they're not only are they performing really thorough inspections on this critical component, but they're actually performing it at a different location. So they're drawing samples from inventory, sending it over to this different location for inspection, and then it's coming back and they're putting it back in the inventory with everything else. So you've got this virgin product that's still very clean off of the injection molding equipment, and you've got this other product that's been handled by who knows where and been shipped back and forth. And these level of details are often missed on the supplier quality side. So that's an example that comes to mind just don't forget those aspects when you're doing the check boxes for the suppliers.
Good point. And you mentioned checklists. So I'm going to ask both same questions. So discuss scenarios where you've seen where companies rely too heavily on checklists to make those decisions, Martel, just like you kind of just talked about, that resulted in ineffective or poor decisions. And Doug, I'll start with you. So they relied too heavily on checklists and it actually came to an ineffective or poor decision.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not sure if I have a whole lot of experience of with companies using checklists, as the sole tool. And I think they're there, and anyone who's read the checklist manifesto, after that you're kind of pumped up about checklists and that sort of thing. I think that, certainly, for me, here recently, it was more about simple communication, and whether or not the checklist, and in its entirety, whether it was complete or not complete, or an effective tool or not an effective tool, it hadn't the information that they had gleaned, from the checklist, had not been properly communicated. And so, maybe regulatory affairs and the QA and production folks were not in line with everything. And so, sometimes you can get the cart before the horse when establishments have been listed in applications, and then, and so again, we're going through a series of checklists here to make sure we have everything in order as we file these applications with an agency. And yet, like, everybody wasn't on the same sheet there. I mean, it wasn't prepared. They were not ready. And so, and again, with the user fees, now you can understand exactly in the time frame of when that pre-approval will come. So if you're submitting on a certain day, the clock starts then for when the pre-approval will come. Now, if the other folks who are going to be like sitting across the table from the FDA are ready for that inspection, I think that, well, in this case, they were scrambling to be ready, and and fingers crossed when they're ready to do that pre-approval inspection.
I've seen that before. I've seen it once where they sent in the application and they had a process validation run just fail. And then FDA literally called and said, we'll be there in 2 weeks. Talk about scrambling.
Yeah.
People coming from all corners of the earth to this site. Martel, any thoughts?
Yeah, checklists are a great reminder of things that should not be forgotten. But I like Doug's comment that it should not be the sole the sole indication that things are in good shape. I think that the main problem is with checklists, and we see this problem with standards. I'll talk about that in a minute. Is that when you're working through the checklist, often people forget to take a step back and say, okay, what else do I need to assess here? This is my opportunity to use my brain and to think about, okay, what is the big picture? What have we not assessed yet in this checklist? And it can be too easy to just want to work through the checklist, get them all taken care of, and be done. On the standards side, we make it very clear, like with regards to the standards associated with sterilization, for example, that this standard, the information in this standard is not intended to be a checklist for compliance. But these are going back to that discussion of these are the minimum requirements. And the question that you mentioned previously today, Steve, do you want to be the minimum person? I forget exactly how you said that, but is that what you want to be known as? And checklists can be too easily, putting those blinders on. This is what we need to focus on, and forgetting to take a step back and look. What else really is important here that we need to assess?
Yeah, I agree with you. So I know, checklists are important, but I think they don't take the place of critical thinking. So Martel, from that aspect, how do you get more critical thinking into an organization?
Oh, man,
that's a big question. I know.
I'm telling you, I'm ready to take notes here. So
okay,
me too.
Well, let me share some really good advice I got from a dear friend in the industry a few years ago. She sat me down once and said, so Martel, why are you seeing a lack of critical thinking and people just diving in to try and really thoroughly understand these concepts that are important in their jobs? And of course, my first answer was, well, they're lazy. They want to be given things. They don't want to take the initiative and figure it out for themselves. And every answer I gave, she kept saying, nope, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. And eventually I said, okay, so what is it? And she said, you you need to inspire them to want to be a critical thinker. You need to inspire them to be better. So then that put the focus back on me, that I need to spend time with these people in my organization and other organizations. I need to spend time with them and show them through example. This is what it means to be a critical thinker. And these are the results of doing it properly. So that's
Good point.
that's one example there.
Well said. Doug, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, we're all, in my experience, mostly, everyone is struggling with the same issue. I mean, I think that, for whatever reason, it appears that, like some people are better at critical thinking than others. And it was like, what is this, like an education thing, or the way you were educated, or and that sort of thing. But I wonder if it isn't sometimes about the ability, this also builds into the quality culture. It's like, no one wants to be the one that, like, you have to be able to raise your hand. You have to be the one who is going to bring up another idea. If we're sitting at the table and we're brainstorming through something, and we're really trying to get to the bottom of it, it's like, like, what kind of culture do you have there that you're going to be, and you're the relative new guy, or girl, a gal. And so, like, do you feel that you have the ability to kind of interject into this discussion? Or you just, kind of sitting there taking it in? And as we're kind of pushing through things, and really, when it's important to really apply some critical thinking to a situation, like, what's the atmosphere like there? Like, are there barriers? Just like, Martel, you're saying you have to encourage people to be willing to do it. And so for me, when we're talking about, like, quality risk management, I say, like, you can't really manage the risk if you don't understand it, or you're not aware of it, or you choose to ignore it. Those two sides of it. And so, and I think that that's the part where, like, critical thinking becomes, a piece of both of those things, where, like, you can't put your head around how this is happening, or what the most probable root cause is, or, you just want it to go away. And if we have a culture here where we're trying to push things, like, sweep it under the rug sort of thing, then you are certainly not inspiring people to critical thought, because, smart people will be able to figure out that this isn't the right thing, or we we were on the verge of figuring this out, and now the push is coming down from on high to just kind of move forward with this. And so there's all kinds of energy coming from different areas on this. But like, for some reason, there are all different kinds of obstacles, I think, to good, solid critical thinking. And it's much, it's causing issues for sure.
No, I agree with you. Good points. I think, again, part of it is removing the fear, so people will speak up. I call it the takes a village approach, because it takes multiple different functional areas sometimes, especially if it's one of those real big hairy problems. I mean, also, get it in your organizations. Do you have different people that have come from different organizations, so they have different perspectives on things? They haven't just seen it from that particular organization. And I think also from the quest for knowledge, making sure, people are curious, or they, again, like Doug, you mentioned, from the culture of the organization, they just get it done, or sweep it under the rug and move on to the next thing, of course, until it blows up in your face.
Right.
All good points. So, folks in the audience, we've got about 15 minutes left. If you have a question or comment, please pop it into the chat. We'd love to hear from you. So, guys, tell me what you think about. So, discuss a company's attitude towards training. How might that impact decision making, both positively and also on the negative side? And Martel, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, the difficult thing about training for us, and I think this extends to other situations as well, is that if you have training too tightly set up, and so much before you say, okay, you can't do anything until this training is done, and here's this huge list of training you need to do, So training is important, of course, and I spoke a little, previously about what the details of that training should include. So I'll mention two things. One is make sure that the training details are sufficient so that you can go back later and say, yes, this one aspect specifically was addressed during the training because it's documented here. It is specific enough to show the details of what we're actually covered. The other aspect is how much training is really needed before someone can start to do some things. You can have this mindset where, this is the training they have to do to be able to perform this overall job that they're in. But, and, a term we use are like freshman level tasks. So can you break the training up so that it's detailed? Yes. But after a certain amount of that training, they can start functioning already in some aspect of what they're supposed to be doing while they're working on the more detailed training later. And we see some of the bigger problems with training, one, not enough detail, and two, it's too daunting. And we think it takes 6 months. You can't even start to do anything until you've been doing this for 6 months. And that's frustrating for an individual to feel like they have so much to wait for before they can actually start functioning in their job. And it's arduous from a company being able to staff positions that when there's so much time before they can actually become at least partially functional.
Well said.
Yeah.
Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you see it, across the board. I think that, there's a lot for me. I mean, from time to time, you get into some real antiquated ideas about training. I think, Martel, you were talking about this, about like, people will, read and understand. It's like you're going to come in, you're going to read the SOP, and then you're suddenly going to understand it. I mean, as if it was that easy. And, especially if you're coming in off the street, like right out of college or something like that, with these freshman level, so to speak. It's like this is going to, this isn't going to be an incredibly complicated task, but this is really your first foray into this sort of thing. So, and I think there's one thing with like, dealing with it on tasks, but I guess, some of the things that I've seen is that you try to make the training too much of a team building exercise, where to like, if you're still doing Jeopardy as your training event, I mean, that's fun and everybody's going to enjoy it. And like, maybe they'll actually take it away and not even realize because they were having so much fun, and everyone's laughing and that sort of thing. But I was like, I wonder if that's really meeting the training objective as much as it is meeting like that kind of building the team, type of objective. And there's times when you want to do a little bit of both, and that's a good thing. But I think, again, like something like data integrity, when the data integrity explosion, as I called it, happened around, 2012, 13, 14, somewhere around in there, like everyone was forced into, we all had an awakening. There was an enlightenment. I mean, so like, this is going to be a big deal. It was dynamic and unfolding, the evolving expectation was moving. So it was very difficult to kind of train people in Alcoa. And then Alcoa wasn't enough. We needed Alcoa plus, and so, I mean, these were, general things that it wasn't like it was going to take, we were going to have to, read a whole bunch and really get in. This was common sense approach to it. We were just putting terms together so that attributable or legible or those kinds of things, and applying it to again, back to this day in, day out GMP mission. So it was, but for me, I really saw that it was, again, like getting the idea of data culture, which is kind of, this year was the first year I'd heard those things pushed together, data integrity and quality culture. Again, there's a lot of training that's outside of the actual task at hand. That for me, like we will be able to find a way to get these folks to understand how to turn wrenches on equipment or run HPLC equipment and process the results and those kinds of things. But putting these kinds of more academic ideas like data integrity or data governance or quality culture into a training event is different than reading instructions in an SOP and following them step by step as if we're baking a cake. I mean, like you will be able to get people to do that. getting people to understand and really take to heart what you're trying to teach them with data culture, for instance, is a much different thing. So it takes a different approach, and I've seen people pass, like be successful and, have some failures and just that, or it takes longer to get those kinds of concepts across rather than just, reading the instructions, following them appropriate, as best they can, documenting them accordingly and that sort of thing.
Well said. Yeah, it's kind of going from knowledge to wisdom. Yeah, you might be knowledgeable about it, but you don't have the wisdom yet.
And maybe if I can add to that, Steve, if I can. So,
yeah,
an important thing there is the whole tribal knowledge idea, and where do you capture that deeper knowledge, that deeper information? And I see this all the time, unfortunately, both internally, and of course we're always working on trying to fix that problem, but also externally, where you got this question of, well, why was this decision made? Why is it done in this way? And nobody knows. And the answer is, that's what we've always done. And now, but I also see situations where sometimes people want to put into SOPs, they want to put the why into the SOP. This is why we made this decision. And I don't think that's the right location for the SOP. Should be, this is what you're doing and this is how you do it. But can you find a location somewhere to harbor this information, this why behind what we're doing, so that 10 years down the road, someone can say, well, this is what the procedure says, but we don't understand what led to that decision. And oftentimes it was, well, there was a regulatory audit and we had a good discussion. And as a result of that regulatory audit, we decided we were going to do it this way and this is why. But that information is so often lost because it's not captured anywhere. So can you, as a company, can you find a location or a couple of locations to capture this information, and then get someone who is involved in that decision, get them to write it up, say, this is what led to it. Here's why we do it this way, so that information is retrievable in the future.
That's a good perspective. So that's basically ingraining the learning. So, Martel, have you seen any good examples on how to do that around I call it the knowledge management side of things?
Well, I've seen plenty of bad examples. And
start with those first. Give us a couple bad examples, and then both we can all talk about good examples we've seen.
So there are two bad examples I see all the time on the sterilization side of things. One is, well, these are sterilization parameters. This is the minimum. This is the maximum. And then you ask, okay, so you had an excursion in a sterilization process, and so it was a little bit longer, a little bit higher, or whatever. Why was that value selected? And there's no data to support why. And so then the whole, the ability to even use this whole batch of product is raised. Whereas, I think maybe once or twice I've seen a situation where, yeah, here's the document, here's all the testing that we did, here's how we support this range and why we do that. And so when you get this excursion, you can look back and say, well, we selected something that was more narrow than what we actually qualified for. We did that for safety, to allow for these types of problems. So you can easily release products. Say, okay, well, these are the parameters we've established, but we qualified to these parameters here. So it's okay to go. Seldom do I see that. Usually we don't know why these parameters were selected. And that makes you have to go back. Well, do we scrap the entire batch? Do we have to do a whole bunch of revalidation or requalification work before we can do anything with that batch? And so that's probably the most common one that I see.
Okay. What about on the good side of things? Where have you seen where this has actually really worked for a company, and what did they do?
Yeah. So the companies that do it really well, they have their SOP says this is how we do this, but then they have this clear structure, this clear connection between the SOP and supporting information, supporting documentation. Sometimes it's mentioned in the SOP. It says, by the way, in your list of documents, well, this is a document that is critical to this SOP, to the background, to the understanding of this SOP. and that's also a control document, and it's given a numbering system, but it's not attached to or it's not part of the SOP, because I think those should be separate. That clear documentation and that clear connection is extremely beneficial.
Yeah, well said. Doug, what about you? Good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I guess as far, there are plenty of examples, I think, where the training has not been effective, and really kind of understanding training effectiveness. And we go back to the Jeopardy mold or model. It was like, was that really effective in getting the point across to your folks? And in a lot of cases, you can tell, like, if that's the only GMP training that they ever had, that, again, like making the jump to try to really bring across the concept of Alcoa, because we're going to be manually recording results in batch records, for a while now in most places. And so just to make that connection, there was kind of a breakdown there. And but I think that on the good side for me, well, I think one example, and it's not so much ambiguous. I mean, this was specific to, we talk about the, in aseptic processing, there's like, it's really difficult to get folks that are trained and qualified to be inside a clean room. And so there's a series of steps that it takes to, you just can't bring them in off the street and have them in doing open door interventions, or that would not be the desired, setup. So, how do you get them from A to B? How do you get them ready for that sort of thing? And, and I think there are now, these days, there are kind of AI options for that sort of thing. But, a decade ago, some folks just built a modular, baby clean room inside their warehouse and called it Aseptic Aseptic University. And so, it was like they had an opportunity to bring their folks in a non-product, so no worries about products or any kind of things like that, but they could work through some of those things. And I thought that at the time, I thought, like, wow, that was a great idea. I've never seen anyone else do that. And to have that capability, to be able to, not have to be concerned with media fills and those kinds of things when we're trying to qualify people, in a situation where if something goes wrong here, we're going to have a lot of explaining to do. It took the stress out of it, and it gave them like a really solid way to go about, getting these people ready for that type of operation.
So, you can make mistakes and learn from it without affecting product quality.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Great examples, guys.
And I think also, I'll just say that, for me, I've also seen where, like oversight is another thing I've been preaching for a long time. I mean, FDANews came out 10 years ago now, and they added oversight to the definition of CGMP. A lot of people are forgetting about this, but, so oversight should be a regular part of your operation. For me, that means the quality unit, of course, but it could be as simple as, like, as we're working through, we've read the SOP, we've gotten that basic training ready to go, we're doing the OJT stuff, and, like, there's some supervision there, but it's not like a one-off deal. Like, now, you've done it once, you were successful. Okay, we can, that kind of more active supervision where they were kind of really coming back to make sure that these individuals were really kind of meeting the standard there, and not just kind of, just passing by in this one step, analysis or whatever it was, where they're kind of, like that. It's more kind of an approach where you kind of you're bringing in some energy and then a little less and a little less until we can kind of finally get them out of the nest and on their own, so to speak. And so that kind of real supervision, with an intent, has shown some success.
Supervision with intent. I like that. Good. We have a couple minutes left, and we just had a question come into the box from Mimo. So Mimo asked, do you suggest to challenge the critical parameters during your validation run if you already have established the range or ranges during your DOEs, your design of experiments, and other developmental work? Martel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I don't think you should challenge every parameter, but I think if you look at it from a risk perspective and you say, okay, with this process here, what are some of the most likely causes for what we would call a failure? And if some of those causes deal with a specific parameter, then I think it's wise to challenge that. And hopefully, and then the next question is, well, okay, this is a critical parameter from a risk perspective. This will cause us problems. Well, how likely is it? And this is going back just typical, risk assessment type stuff. How likely is it to happen? A specific example might be for radiation and sterilization. Every once in a while, let's say your processing dose is, say, 20 to 40 kilograms, and so the question is, those are both critical parameters. How likely is it that one of those might go out? And let's say in a specific situation, well, maybe it's more likely that on the upper end, occasionally, once every couple of years, they might hit accidentally 41 kilograms instead of 40. And you say, well, clearly the product is still functional. We're not killing patients, but what data do we have to support that? And anytime there's a parameter that has a chance of causing problems, that also has a chance of occurring frequently, you should address that during your validation runs. And ideally, you address that by just saying, okay, this is our processing range, but we've qualified this product up to 45 kilogray in the example I gave. And therefore, even though ideally we want 20 to 40, up to 45 is okay. And it's a simple decision. Yeah, we've qualified up above that, so it's not a problem. Any type of validation process, you can assess it in that way. What's critical, what is likely to happen, and let's assess that. And let's give ourselves a little bit of buffer in between what we set and what the product can actually handle.
Good point.
Yeah.
Doug, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that, you need data. And so you're going to need data to support your this process. And so when you're collecting this data, it's going to be, you're going to be challenging those parameters as they're set. And I think that, having information in DOE and in development work is one thing. Being at commercial scale, obviously it's something different there. You need to understand this process at commercial scale. So, and you'll get to a point where you have enough data to understand those ranges, or when the product's in that. It's a risk-based approach to it. You should be applying a risk-based approach to where you're going to challenge and where you're going to collect data and where you're going to build confidence in that process. So yeah, I agree.
Gotcha. Doug, I'm going to hand it right back to you. Then Martel will hand it to you. So we are right at time now, but I'm going to give you a minute or so of kind of final thoughts, last words.
Sure. I think that, as we said, the most important part about compliance is this idea of the minimal standard. I mean, so if your goal is to just be in compliance, then you're missing the point here, and so everyone should be aware that the regulations only provide the minimal standard, and that continual improvement is the only way that you're going to be successful, and that, like, to take the stress out of the equation. It's like, it's not going to be, this is a very difficult situation. I mean, like, we're not making basketballs here. And so if they're a little bit too big and they don't fit through the rim as well, no one's going to perish. So we don't have that kind of wiggle room in the public health mission, right? So we have to be, dedicated to continual improvement. Like, that is not only going to drive the quality of the product and success for the business and all of that, but it will provide you success in the regulatory, side of things as well.
Well said. And like I say, for every law and regulation, I'd say, I can speak to the United States at least, there's a reason why. So you look at the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Each time it's been changed, it's been built off the backs of dead or died people who got injured. Americans, yeah. Martel, over to you. What do you think? Final words.
Yeah, just the idea of make sure you have all the right people in all the stages of product development. And if you don't have those right people internally, then bring them in from external, because so that there's a document from Amy, it's Amy TIR 100 it talks about end-to-end sterility assurance as an example of this. So sterility assurance does not start when the product is done being manufactured. Now you have to determine your sterilization process, but not just in the realm of microbiology and sterilization, but in all realms. Bring all of the right people in at every stage. It's as early as possible. Get them involved to address potential problems that might come up down the line.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate both your time. Thanks for your thoughts. Jeanette, I know you got a question come in there. Hopefully we're at time now, but if you could readdress that question tomorrow with some of our other experts, please. So Doug, Martell, thank you for your time and appreciate it. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night.
Thank you.